Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Abigail Darnett, Ipsos User Experience Research Director. Abigail, you have the floor.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Good morning, and thanks, Megan, for that great introduction. So, Amanda and I are both directors on our UX staff, and because of that, we will be focusing today, just a kind of a disclaimer, we'll be focusing today on that user perspective, getting back to those roots of UX. So we won't be talking about any of like the Ipsos survey privacy or privacy laws or anything like that. We really are today grounding ourselves in what users think and feel and need out of these privacy and data control designs. So to go ahead and jump in, what we'll be talking about today, just a refresher. So technology does require a lot of consent, and if it's poorly done, it can kind of force immediate decisions that users may or may not regret. So, but if done well, companies can use and collect that data to create a lot of best-in-class experiences because they are empowered and they are trusted with that data. So today we want to talk about how users think about that data, what makes them nervous, what makes them okay with sharing, kind of their mental model there. We'll also discuss what the transparency and why users ultimately do consent to data collection, what makes them opt out. So what's going in and what's going out. And finally, kind of bringing it full circle, how designers can build that trust and consent when you're actually, putting pen to paper and making a new design. So privacy in 2021 is a really hot topic. It essentially affects everyone who uses the internet, whether you're providing the data or the company collecting it or even sharing it. There's new data laws, GDPR, CCPA. We also have some products that are pushing into privacy space with Apple's new iOS release. So consumers are gaining a lot more control over how their data is used, as well as a lot more awareness. So what's that mental model? What are users thinking when they think about data? So across dozens of studies that we've conducted across different like tech, medical, fintech, a lot of different industries, we kind of have a core sense of how users think about that data. So they roughly bucket into 3 different types. You have sensitive data, which would be financial, banking, credit card information, sensitive identities, so like your social security number, or even some of your health information that you would expect to be protected under HIPAA. The next tier down, we have social or personal information. So this is still information about the user, but it's things like usernames, settings, their personal demographics, their race, their gender, where their current location, as well as any photos or videos that they might upload. And finally, there's behavioral data. And behavioral data is things like websites or searches that the individual user may be conducting, like their behavior with the product. Or it could be the device's behavior. So this could be things like access to camera or microphone, or even crash data or environmental data. So was that device really hot? What happened when that file got corrupted? So not only my behavior as a user is going in, but it could be the device's behavior. And this leads to different benefits and risks. So sensitive identity information has a lot of clear risks here. You're going to lose money. You're going to have identity theft. But because we are in such a digital world, there is a benefit and convenience to being able to access and store this information online. It just needs to be really secure because that risk is really high. Stepping down a tier, the social personal, the risks here are a little softer. These are social interactions. So maybe you end up being a little bit embarrassed because your Facebook got hacked and now you have to tell everybody to ignore that message that came out from your profile. But this, by sharing and storing and allowing a company to collect this information, you're going to be able to connect with devices conveniently, connect with other people conveniently, but also there's an element of entertainment here. So by empowering companies with that data, users are aware that they'll get better experiences, they'll have better experiences, it will be more fun, it will be more convenient. And finally, behavioral. Here, the risks and benefits are a little less clear. The benefits, by tracking my behavior, you can better customize that experience, but also crash data is going to help the function. And ultimately, users do want the things to work. But the risk here, if you're always following me, I can feel a little tracked, but also I don't know what you're doing with this. Will you really fix the bug, or are you using this data in a different way? So that murkiness really makes makes users stop and think, why does this matter? You know, they are very aware that the data collection is being, is being collected, is being used, and that may not always be in their favor, right? So in some situations, passively track how that information is collected can impact not only the request itself for what type of information, but how that information is being collected can also impact it. So if you're passively tracking my location constantly for a shopping app, that might make me feel a little watched. You're kind of over my shoulder in that instance. However, a map app following me, knowing my location all the time, totally makes sense. They have a reason to have that longitudinal element. So how that data is collected and when it's collected is also going to impact how users think or feel about that data collection, and ultimately if they will share that information or decide to keep it to themselves. So ultimately, the data being collected needs to have some benefit, definitely for the person giving up the data, but they're aware that the company is going to benefit in some way. So there's really a what are they thinking when they decide whether or not to share really does come down to, what am I going to get as the user? So am I going to get a more convenient experience? Am I going to be able to skip the step where I have to tell it it's okay that it uses my location? Or maybe I'll go ahead and give it this data because I assume it's all aggregated together. It's in a big pile. I don't have to worry about it because it's all in a big pile. Bad actors would have to sort through a mountain to find me. Or maybe it's anonymized. So yeah, you can have it. That crash data doesn't track back to me, doesn't matter. Or finally, they may just have a hope that it's not sold. They may be living on a prayer a bit and just trust that company enough that they won't mishandle or sell their data. So ultimately, it comes down to this transaction about the benefits. So the users know that there's value, but they don't necessarily always know what to do with it. They know there's these privacy laws, but they don't always have a clear way to change that transaction. And right now, or at least before the Apple iOS, the transaction was very much you either have access or you don't. You can get on the internet or you cannot get on the internet, and you have to give that data. It's a bit of a gatekeeping feel. However, users don't, even in that situation, users don't feel like they're giving ownership of their data. They're just giving access to the data. So this is why sometimes the selling comes up in their consideration set. I still own this data and you're trying to sell it out from underneath me. So there's that element as well. It's not only being able to access the internet and the lives of everybody else, in a convenient manner, but it's also, am I giving you, the person holding my data, permission to sell it or simply borrow it? Because I, as the user, have not given you my identity. So ultimately, we see oftentimes the consent request actually stands in the way. It's popping up at a point when users have maybe recently downloaded or recently started using a product, and so they want to get to the product that they want to use. So they may be just clicking through a series of access requests and not really thinking about their consent proactively, and just kind of clicking reflexively, either yes or no, whatever their personal preference leans. Also, if they feel like they really need it now and they need to capitulate and give that access so they can use that feature so they can go find their friends at the amusement park. This sense of urgency can kind of erode if they feel like they're actually able to give up that data, or if they were kind of pressured into this transaction. So ultimately, what do we do coming out of this, knowing that users are very aware, they want to protect their data, but they don't want to feel pressured? So what can we do as UX designers to kind of help, get that access, but alleviate some of that pressure? So Amanda, I'll go ahead and hand it off to you.
Thanks, Abby. So as we talked about in the beginning, users have more and more information and more power when it comes to their data, but are they taking it? The answer to that question depends. So as Abby's shown you, in the minds of users, data sharing carries various risks and rewards for users. And the UX, or user experience, of a given consent dialogue has a strong effect on whether or not a user consents, and in turn is able to reap the full benefits of a given product or service. So now we're going to jump into some principles that you can follow to clarify the consent process and give users the peace of mind that they need to opt in and get that really great experience from your product or service. Next slide. Abby, I think you still have control. Okay. So the principles for data stewardship, we're going to go into these in more detail, but informed consent, secure information, enable control, clarify the design, and have a purpose. Next. So inform is about education to build trust. Users, these are often unspoken questions. You know, as we said, they tend to be pretty reflexive in the consent. But if you can answer these questions, they're going to feel really comfortable with the process. So who's asking? Do I trust this company? That comes down to past experience with a company, reputation of the brand, a professional look and feel of the app, or makes people comfortable with the service request. Users might deny the request if it's something that they've never heard of, or if it's presented in a way that makes it look suspicious. Next, how will it benefit me? So something like access to microphone or share location on a social media app might show how the information may be gathered or what type of information is gathered, but it doesn't really speak to why it's necessary to the user's end goal and ultimately what they want to get out of the product. And then that uncertainty kind of creates this black box feeling and leaves the user guessing as to how their data is collected and used. It should be stored securely. We'll get into that in a minute. And we'll also get into third parties a little bit more, but at a high level, if they are involved, what are they doing with the data? Sharing and selling to third parties does raise suspicion because it widens that circle of access. It should be limited, and if it's explained, then people tend to be more okay with it. And then also, if there is a third party, how will they use it? And how is the company going to use it? So one of the examples that may seem super innocuous is data to improve products or services. Sometimes users are really skeptical, but that their data could really help improve the product or service. So kind of being able to provide some background, either with a link or a little bit of a visual, can really go a long way in easing their peace of mind. Next. Next one. All right, secure information, maintain trust. So only ask for what's needed. You know, try to keep it to things that are essential for the use of the service. And then people tend to believe that if hackers want to get in, they're able to get it in, but they want to be able to trust that the companies they engage with are doing their best to protect them. Limit the access to third parties, show how it's kept safe, and anonymize and aggregate. So information that makes it easy to identify an individual is the most sensitive, as Abby mentioned. However, the assumption that information is amassed into one large anonymous database and used more as like an overall pattern makes people feel a lot more comfortable consenting. And then information shared between users, so maybe location, health metrics, and fitness apps, tends to be seen as helpful and is often tied to safety. But this is also expected to be finite and easy to control and set in terms of who has access, how long they have access, how often they have access, what they can see, and things like that. So you should enable people to have some control over that, which brings us to our next point. So control is all about data management. So provide people with options and levels of permission. So for example, it's okay to share with a third-party developer, but not a third-party marketer. It's okay to share with my mom for the next hour, but I want to know that that access will be turned off at some finite point in the future without my effort. And if I want it on for all time, I can still revoke it at any point. Users also like the idea of being able to edit and correct their data for better accuracy, or to delete it, either specific data points or wipe all data within a certain time period. And And then changing permission should be easy. People tend to report that they believe they can do this in settings, so that's where it should be located. Although we're not sure in practice that they actually go in there, they like the option to be able to do it. It's all about making people feel comfortable. And then often users realize the advantage of sharing a given type of data once they've been using for a while. So give them the option to go in and change if they accidentally chose not to during the initial setup. Next. So clarify, this is really important. So clarity is key to building transparency and trust. The consent dialog should be a simple yes/no choice, and then an option to learn more conveys transparency. Avoid legalese and dense blocks of text, as these can imply hidden motives and belly trust. So in this example, the copy is actually really clear. It's easy to understand. It probably tested really well. It's conversational. It shows exactly what they're doing and why, but it's too dense. So people are probably not going to read it. And I think there's a lot of things you could show with toggles or icons to convey what you're trying to convey. Even something as simple as a lock conveys security, and it's appreciated. And next. So finally, I think this is probably the most important one, have a purpose. Users want their data to work for them. So we've talked a lot about consent, but this is all about how you're actually using the data. Users are okay with their data being collected. They're okay with that transaction. And in fact, as we've seen, they're often happy to trade their data, knowing that they'll receive something in return. So showing that you're collecting the data with intention builds the trust needed for a long-term customer relationship and ultimately enables you to create a best-in-class experience, supercharge your features, and enable seamless interactions. And that is our conclusion. What questions do you have? And it's only my name on here, but that's just for simplicity. Feel free to email me after the presentation with anything that doesn't get answered.
Hey everybody, so we do have a few questions that rolled in from the audience, so I will read the first one out to you. It is, have you noticed a difference in attitudes or behavior depending upon whether the experience is on a desktop, /laptop, or on a mobile phone?
Hey, that's a great question. So the device does matter, and we do see differences. So comes down to what's the device's purpose. So you use a smartwatch very differently from like a home device like an Amazon Echo versus a desktop versus your phone. So the request needs to kind of match the device itself. You know, a location device for a stationary product doesn't always make 100% of success or sense. However, with phones, we do see a very different approach. Phones are about as close to a second body that people have. That is a copy of them in some instances. And the way that participants talk about it, access to the phone is different from other devices. So, you know, desktop, home device, smartwatch, we see similar types of thought process going in, whereas the phone has so much on it and it does so many different things that access and consideration for the phone does kind of bring in some of the personal risk considerations. And so a good design can help mitigate some of those concerns. So if someone is, you know, privacy or data collection sensitive, if you're asking on their phone and you don't have a clear reason and it's kind of confusing, they'll probably go with their gut and default no. If they're less privacy sensitive, then they may click yes. But if you're really clear and you make yourself trustworthy, then those skeptics may not go with their gut and give you access to what they feel like is their second person in the digital world.
That's great. Thank you for answering that one. The next question is, don't people just click on these things anyway?
I can take that one. I mean, that's a really good point. So they frequently do, but they don't always do that. And, you know, one of the things to keep in mind there is that a lot of people, they know something about how these things work, but sometimes they feel like they don't have a choice. That's especially true if you want to shop online or read an article that tends to come up more on websites. So they might just click agree and then say something like, oh my gosh, I just gave away all my data. I have no idea what these people are doing with it. And it kind of just builds this idea, this vague mistrust. And you have to keep in mind that people are seeing multiple consent dialogues over the course of their day, and they can become fatigued. So if your consent message is the 50th thing people have seen and they already feel like they've been spread really thin on giving information away, they might be less likely to click if it's not really clear. And then once that happens, they, might abandon the journey, or just have a subpar experience. So it is an important thing for building trust over time.
Got it. Okay, next question. Where do you think this issue falls on the risk-reward spectrum? Is it more of a downside risk if companies don't approach it in the way you recommend, or is it an upside reward of loyalty / long-term relationship?
I can answer this one, and Abby, feel free to jump in, but I would say it's more of an upside reward in terms of loyalty, because, then people are getting the full benefit of whatever it is that your product or service is, whether that's tailored recommendations, there might be some benefit to location sharing, and that just makes the user feel more like you know them, because at the end of the day, to really get to the next generation of web experiences, companies, with artificial intelligence and all of these really great technologies that we have now, data is going to power those. So we need to be able to collect it. We just need to be able to use it in a smart way that creates kind of the seamless user experience that people expect. So I'd say that there's also kind of the importance of using data smartly, because there's something else that comes up where people know you have a lot of data about them. So if you're not able to use it, then they kind of feel like things are a little bit jumpy almost, in terms of like recommendations or predictions, things like that. They want that to be really, really seamless.
Got it. Makes sense. And we do have one last question. In terms of what users get out of the transaction of giving up their data, how do they feel about personalization?
Hey, I can take this one. That is a great question. And we actually see a lot of this come up in non-privacy usability studies, where participants will just ask, like, can't the device know this for me? If I tell it, won't it just know that and learn about me? And they're very aware that that's going to require their data. But when they have that relationship with the device or the company, that room for personalization is a reason to give up their data, as long as it's not used for things like, targeted ads that follow me around. Those following ads can feel a little bit creepy. And as well as long as that information is also coming from a known place, like if they don't know where this personalization is coming from, then they often assume the worst. This is where we hear a lot of anecdotes about, like, oh, I was talking to a friend and I had my phone nearby and we were talking about going on a trip, and then I see all these ads for trips.
Right. Well, and then
this is coming from the microphone, right? And it's not necessarily coming from the microphone, but they have no idea where that ad is coming from. So personalization can be tricky, and it's really powerful when there's a relationship with the device and it is used to supercharge features or bring in new elements for the users. But there's that dark side comes up when they're not sure where what data that personalization drew from. And if it's coming seemingly from random places, it can feel a little bit like your tech devices are ganging up on you to sell you a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, like, to the point of the personalization, like on certain things it's expected. We see this on credit card websites. So this is my credit card company. I'm logged in. Why are they asking for more information from me? Don't they have this already? So it's like, once you have the data, make sure you're using it and making things as personalized as possible. Because once they've opted into that on your site, ads aside, because ads aren't coming, they don't necessarily know if those are coming from you, then it's super useful.
That's great. Well, I think we're probably ready to close for today. So I just really want to thank the both of you for today's really interesting presentation. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And if we didn't get to your question, then we will do so by email. You will also receive an email with a direct link to today's recorded presentation. And of course, we welcome the opportunity to speak with you. So please feel free to reach out to us. That now concludes today's webinar. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks.